Welcome to Compliance Therapy with Igor Volovich, presented by Qmulos. Qmulos, converged continuous compliance. Get it together.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Qmulos podcast series. And today's topic is Zero Trust High Confidence. Think for success in your Zero Trust journey. Today we're very lucky to be joined by a panel of leading industry experts, the leading voices in our industry, who are talking about Zero Trust, inventing Zero Trust, and implementing Zero Trust. So to kick us off with introductions, the one and only, the man, the legend himself, the creator of Zero Trust, Mr. John Kindervag. John, mic's yours.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to having this chat with you people, because this is fun. This is the only thing I know how to talk about too. So
Great. We'll stay on topic. Dave, I'll use.
All right, can you hear me now? All right, there we go. I'm Dave Lewis, Global Advisory CISO at Cisco Systems by way of Duo Security. And I have been approaching Zero Trust from the perspective of trying to get adoption from folks as opposed to getting into the nitty gritty of microzone segmentation and things like that. I'm just trying to make it more accessible by building a narrative so people can better understand and take it to heart.
Awesome. Thanks for being with us. Drew, on to you, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm Drew Church. I am a global security strategist at Splunk, dealing all manner of things security here. So doing stuff with Zero Trust data sources, partnering with folks like Qmulos, Duo Security, Cisco Systems. We love our partner ecosystem. So really glad to be here. Been around the Fed life for a very long time, though I don't cover just Fed anymore. But this topic near and dear to my heart.
Wonderful. Thanks for making the time for us. We know you guys are busy right now. Everybody is.
Oh, boy.
Especially you. All right. On to two.
Hi, everyone. Qmulos, Chief Product Officer at Qmulos. I head up the development of security compliance automation tools. And I've been looking at Zero Trust from the perspective of security controls, like how I look at everything else in the world. So eager to talk about that today. So thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, too, for being with us. And I am your host, Igor Volovich, VP at Qmulos. And I've been talking about Zero Trust, writing about Zero Trust on and off, but definitely not as much as John and the rest of you guys. But I'd love to talk about the concept. I'll be moderating today's session and asking some of the leading questions and getting us kicked off. So let's talk about what's going on right now in the industry. We see a lot of effort in the federal space, especially now, moving towards Zero Trust. CISA is releasing an architecture framework. We've got the Executive Order EO 14028. We've got the OMB Memorandum M2131 asking for better logging, more timely logging, more extensive logging, and of course, the centralization of that logging information. We're trying to do things sooner, as near real time as possible. We're trying to get inside the attacker's OODA loops, get on that same time scale. Of course, we work in compliance. And so for us, that means automated compliance, getting to that data faster, getting that data to us faster, and then interpreting the results. And we have a vast array of different capabilities represented here on this panel. So I know we're going to get into a lot of interesting conversations about that. But I wanted to kick us off with the idea of, well, what is Zero Trust? Let's get on that same page for our audience's sake. And who better than the creator of Zero Trust, Mr. John Kindervag? Why don't you kick us off with that? What is Zero Trust as a concept, and maybe a little bit of history on how you created it?
yeah, so I joined Forrester Research in 2008 after spending time as a security engineer, network engineer, security architect, pen tester, all those kinds of things, and so I was asked to look at why security isn't working. That was the fundamental question. And through the primary research I did for a couple of years, I realized there was this thing called the trust model, right? If you've ever installed a firewall, you know about the trust model, the idea that the stuff inside your network is trusted and the stuff outside of your network is untrusted. And what the revelation was is that was the fundamental problem. That you had this concept of trust and it caused you to do bad things. And so we had this term trust but verify. And I found that we did a lot of trusting, which meant that we did nothing, right? So when you trust someone, you don't do anything, you don't get in their business, and we don't do any verification. And I asked the CISO one time, I said, I get the trust part, you're not doing anything, right? But what do you for verification? And he said, oh, well, we don't actually verify any users because that would be rude. And I realized we brought too much emotion into in digital systems. So zero trust is a strategy first and foremost that says there is no more trust. We have to eliminate the concept of trust because trust is a human emotion that's been injected into digital systems for absolutely no reason. So zero trust eliminates the concept of trust and focuses on protecting things that get us that impact us if they get stolen, if they get disrupted, those kinds of things. So it's a protection first strategy that eliminates the trust model, and then it has multiple ways that it gets built based upon what you're protecting. So that's the secret. There's no like magic bullet to it, although it is pretty easy to do. But the technology is decoupled from the strategy because the technology, what I realized, was always going to get better, and we're seeing that every single day. Right? There's lots of entrepreneurs, there's lots of research, there's lots of cool things coming out. The technology changes, the strategy doesn't. So it gives people a strategic way to look at cybersecurity in a way that they've never been able to before.
It starts with strategy, and thank you for that intro. And of course, a lot of times we see that that desire to go and buy the thing, right? The latest, shiniest, newest thing, and go put that in, and then call it good. Buy security. You can't buy strategy anymore than you can buy security. You kind of have to develop it. You have to own it, and it has to be an internal thing. If you don't have that buy-in across the board, it's tough to implement anything, but especially something as transformational as zero trust is a concept. So I'd like to go to kind of keep going down the stack. So from strategy, let's go to the data layer. So I'll pivot to Drew because you're at Splunk, and of course, data is what you guys do. Let's talk about what zero trust means to you guys, and how do you look at trust as a concept that informs your decisions and your product design, and also how you enter customer environments and have that conversation about what Splunk can do for them in zero trust.
Great question, Igor. First off, I am not part of the product organization, so I can speak as to why we may do some things, but definitely aren't going to say, hey, I don't have the vision that does, especially with Qmulos. But at Splunk, we really think of zero trust at the foundation of it being data, right? If you don't know what you're protecting, to John's point, hey, like you build the architecture for a specific thing. There is no, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no reference architecture. No one's saying, here's how you do zero trust. And so at the foundation of all of that is data. And so we're trying to take whatever that architecture happens to be. We've got a representative from Cisco Systems on here, Dave, right? Like you bringing in that network layer, you're taking in that AAA data, you're bringing in whatever your firewalls happen to be, your next-gen firewalls. You've got identity data coming from Duo, right? Like whatever that happens to be, right? You have to have that layer. You have to have that visibility. And so at Splunk, the idea there is you bring data and you allow and enable those technologies. There's integration as best as we possibly can make it. We allow that common layer so you can interrogate that data. You can help inform risk decisions because zero trust should help enable the security posture of your organization. It shouldn't be hey, I did zero trust, therefore I am done, right? That is an enabling, forcing function to make sure that you're secure. And so our goal there is to take that data, new data sources, those new architectures that you're implementing, and make sure you can do whatever your security objectives are.
And Drew, just to follow that,
Fantastic.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
Because I used to talk about the first step of zero trust is defining your data. There's a 5-step model on how you do it. And when I was at Forrester, I called it define your data, right? Because I would agree that functionally, I talk about having a data breach stopping data breaches is the grand strategic objective of zero trust because allowing a data breach in your organization is actually the only thing that IT can do to get the CEO of your company fired, right? They don't get fired over ransomware attacks. They get fired over data breaches. One thing that was an interesting nuance over the past 4 or 5 years is that I got some pushback on the data idea, the idea that, we're only protecting data, which is not really what I was saying. And a lot of people said, well, I have this box that I need to protect or whatever. And people started to realize it could do more than protect data. So now today I talk about DAS elements. So you'll hear me today probably talk about a DAS element. So a DAS element is a data element, an application, an asset, or a service. So I call that DAS, and we protect those things. But you're exactly right. There's no reference architecture because it's based upon what you're protecting. So all the time I'm on these calls where people say, oh, where do I put widget X? I don't know. What are you protecting? And they go, gee, I don't know. I haven't thought about that yet. So you're exactly right. It's about you protect. And once you figure that out, then you can do some amazing things. But we haven't been encouraged to understand what we were protecting, especially as network and security engineers, where we were just looking at infrastructure and transport and all those kinds of things.
That's a very interesting observation. I think there's also this idea of looking for precision. When we were trying to say, well, we got to know what we protect, there was this propensity to look for the perfect level of awareness, to have this complete, put our hands completely around the enterprise and figure out what every asset is. And until we got to some, magic threshold, 70%, 80%, some level of visibility, we'd say, well, we don't know, and we don't know how to protect it. And the truth is, you got to figure out what the crown jewels are. You can prioritize your risk activities, and you can mitigate based on that risk prioritization model. You don't have to wait. You can do it now. And of course, then we start about how do you actually implement them. So keep going down the stack. Telemetry comes from somewhere, and it has to come from controls and tools. So let's talk to Dave now about what that means from your perspective. What are the instruments? What are the tools? What kind of solutions do you put in place? And how do you think about it when it comes to implementing zero trust? How do you make it tangible?
So the way I approach it from a discussion of risk, and also making sure that any organization that's trying to get down this path does an assessment of their users, devices, and applications within their environment, much to what John was saying there. If they don't do their homework before they talk to any vendor, they're going to be putting themselves at an off footing. So you want to make sure that you're enabling yourself as a business. And this is where things like a defined repeatable process will help reduce risk in the organization. Zero trust, from the way I approach it, is about that risk-based discussion, how you can reduce that in the organization. And most organizations I've spoken to over the last 2 years, I've been doing a roundtable with CISOs on average about twice a week now. They tend to be like, oh, I got an MFA solution to protect these 2 applications. And it's like, well, why aren't you doing it for all these applications? And it's like, oh, I can do that. So it's just trying to get them to wake up to the idea that this is not just unfortunately, John, all due respect, I hit with, zero trust is a marketing term far too often. And the way I counter that is I say, I'll label it and I'll say, yes, you're right. But there is all of this meat on the bone. And wait, you're right. There is something to this. So just trying to flip the script, because security people by and large tend to be, contrary. So if you say that zero trust will fix X, they're going to go, yeah, I don't know about that. I didn't make it in my shop. I didn't write the script. So you got to put it back in a way that's there as it going to be able to internalize. Because the idea of what the risk is in an environment is something that is really broken in a lot of ways. One power company I worked at back when the world was flat, we had this setup where you had to go into a room to use KVM switches to work on production systems. And then me being me, I was sitting at my desk one day and I tried to RDP to one of those servers and I got right through. So there was no network zone segmentation in that example. It was just, the great Oz saying, don't look behind the, and they accepted that as being actual security. And it turned out it was a flat network. We were able to remedy that in very short order. But before you get into buying any tools and things like, all of the vendors that are here are more than willing to help, but you need to make sure you have a cohesive strategy. You need to do your homework before you talk to any of us. We're all there to help. But as a defender, you have to make sure you know what it is you're protecting, because you have a fiduciary responsibility to your organization to make sure that your data, your users, and all of your sundry bits there. There's the shot kicking in. Sorry. Not an alcoholic shot. I had my booster yesterday. You just really want to make sure that we are approaching this in a way that is going to be sane and a defined, repeatable process, so that that risk does get reduced overall. And as you go through a maturity model, you'll get to that point where, John's overarching message absolutely applies, but you've got to do your homework before you can get to that point.
And just to fill in that a little bit, there's 2 places where this resonates. Zero trust resonates tactically to people who want to implement it, although you're right, they are contrarian. So a lot of battles have been fought down there in those trenches, because that's not the way we've always done it. That was always the number one objection to zero trust. But the early adopters were all leaders, right? It resonated up to the highest levels of the organization. It's not surprising to me that the president issued his executive order mandating zero trust for federal government agencies on May 12th, because I've been working inside the U.S. federal government for a decade on this. It just takes them a long time to move as quick as some of the private sector companies do. So as people in the audience think about this, think of who is the person you're messaging this to? Are you messaging it to a tactical person, somebody who does this with the tools on a day-to-day basis, or are you messaging to a strategic person, somebody who could care less about the technology, who doesn't know spanning tree from the span of a bridge, but you have to explain why cybersecurity is important, which they already know, but why you have a way to do it that resonates to them.
Agree completely.
Couldn't agree more. Well, and the word strategy keeps coming up, and I think it's important to understand what we mean by strategy. Right? To me, at least, the way I look at the world is strategy is a filter. It's a filter for knowing what to do, and most importantly, what not to do, and to really prioritize your efforts, because you have a finite amount of bandwidth and capability and time, and really there's that temporal dimension here also that we talk about. It's not just about being secure or getting to mitigate a risk. It's also on what time scale. And when we have this kind of the built-in, organically inherent asymmetrical model of cybersecurity, the defender is always on the defense, right? We've got the world against us, and we have limited resources. And for them, sometimes they have infinite resources, or at least infinitely scalable resources. I call it that. So
probably
how do we
fast resources is really what they have, right?
Bingo.
Because they have speed on their side. Think about it. Hackers don't have change control, right? When was the last time you heard somebody, well, I tried to hack so-and-so company, it didn't work. When's my next hacking window? And Hacking Central says, we need to schedule a hacking control meeting with all the people who are going to determine that. And that'll be 2 weeks from Monday. And then in 3 weeks on a Sunday night that happens to be your daughter's third birthday, that's going to be the time when you're going to get to the hacking, right? Automatically, our decision-making process, you talk about being inside the OODA loop. I mean, there's no OODA, there's no loop, there's no, we're just flying around the world. I don't know what we're doing, So John Boyd would not understand what we're doing in cybersecurity, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the whole point, right? That we don't spend enough time organizing these efforts. And also, let's be reasonable about it. We are all over the place, and you're absolutely right. I agree with it completely. That we have, we've done a fair amount of effort trying to combine our efforts. We've tried to do the public-private partnerships. We've done the ISACs. We've done all of those things. But ultimately, everyone is kind of on their own. I mean, we have the forums, and we do have our industry collaboration. But by and large, every environment stands on its own. Yes, when the bad thing happens, you call the FBI, and then they'll come and draw a chalk line around your outfit, and that's nice. But nobody's keeping the bad guys at bay, and they might noodle loop, but we kind of don't. We're flailing. A lot of times we're just flailing at the wind or tilting at windmills, and that's problematic. So of course, recognizing that, we came up with these things called frameworks and standards, and we said, look, if you follow them, then bad things won't happen at such a frequency or maybe at such a damage, and so we applied those, but we kind of divorced compliance and security. The things that those standards and frameworks were supposed to bring to us, which was the reduction in risk, became kind of their own exercise, became their own pillar, became their own function. And now we've got these armies of ISOs that, let's be frank, are very early in their careers, don't have a technical background. They basically do clerical work a lot of the time. And that value, the security value of those standards, has kind of gone by the wayside. And so we've got compliance doing compliance, security doing security, and the bad guys are kind of going right in the middle and doing whatever they want to do. And so, to me, it sounds like there's definitely an opportunity to not so much run out and go buy the latest thing, but can you understand the value of the asset you already have in place? Can you take advantage and leverage the telemetry you already have in place from the controls you have in place? Can you understand what the security value of those controls is? And for that, you have to centralize the data. You have to organize that data. You have to understand what the patterns are in that data, and then you have to have some kind of a visual layer so that the humans can understand it and interpret it. Because frankly, that's ultimately we want the humans making decisions, not machines. We want the machines doing what the machines are best at, which is collect information quickly, deposit it, find patterns in it. But then ultimately, the decision about risk is a human decision. And so for that, I'm going to pivot to two. He is Qmulos' product manager, the chief product officer, and understands this better than most of us, I think. Tell us about that part of it, and what role do you think that plays in Zero Trust, and kind of visualizing the controls you have in the environment from a perspective of Zero Trust, understanding what you have in place, understanding your enterprise, and then having it kind of centralized and presented to a human for decision making.
Yeah, sure. So let me start with kind of how I understand and envision the zero trust model. Right? I come from a software development background, so I'm going to date myself a little bit. But when I started first hearing about zero trust, the first thing that came to mind was, maybe about 15 years ago when service-oriented architectures were hot, and you had this concept of all companies, organizations having services, and you could dynamically discover services within your organization, across organization, and then you could dynamically invoke and utilize those services, right? So in that sort of a model, there's no trust because you don't really know a priority who's discovering and using your service, right? So, fast forward 15 years, I don't think that model is really manifested itself in the way it's envisioned, but we are kind of operating in a similar environment, right? Not so much with the concept of web services that we were thinking about 15 years ago, but just the concept of people using cloud service today, SaaS applications, erosion of the perimeter, and so forth. So it is essentially a zero trust environment. You really don't know who's invoking your applications, your services, who's accessing your networks and devices. So then I look at it from the perspective of, okay, if we are operating in this environment where there's zero trust, what security controls do you need to be in place so that you can operate in this type of an environment effectively, right? So a lot of, obviously the controls around access management, least privilege, remote access, those types of things come to mind, right? And then, okay, so now, we've got a good understanding of what kind of controls you need to have in place to be able to operate effectively and securely in this zero trust environment. But then there's a problem of how are those controls being assessed today? Are we assessing them in a timely, critical manner, right? Like the way we're doing things today, you're doing assessments at best every 3 months based on someone going to interview a development team, asking them how they've implemented least privilege. And when something hits and you look back at your SSP report that's 3 months old and you have no idea if you've implemented least privilege properly, to protect against whatever the latest attack or vulnerability is, right? So that's why I think, looking at it from a controls and data perspective, you got to be able to monitor in real time, near real time, the relevant controls to ensure that your zero trust environment in which you're operating in is secure. Without these, you're just not going to be able to survive, essentially. So yeah, like I said at the beginning, I look at everything from the perspective of security controls and what you need to have in place to operate in the environment that we're in today.
Yeah, and that
I think, John, you made. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, no. I mean, that fits the 5-step model of how you actually should do this. So you first define your protect surface. What do you need to protect? So the protect surface is the opposite of the attack surface. I can shrink the overall attack surface down orders of magnitude to something very small and easily known called a protect surface. That contains a single DAS element. So I started out I did not starting out, but I am a recovering QSA also, right? Because PCI is a 12-step program. And so I'm in recovery, but I did learn how to protect a binary data stream, a personal account number. That's all that mattered in PCI. So I'm taking a single DAS element, putting it into a protect surface. I'm mapping the transaction flows. This is the second step you should always do, and use the analytics that you have, because if you don't know how the system works, you're going to break something. And this is from experience. I've broken things, or I've been involved in projects that broke things. And of course, when it gets broken, what gets blamed? Zero trust, not the fact that you didn't know how your system worked. Then the third step is you architect the environment. So this is why you can't really have a real reference architecture for zero trust, because that's step 3, not step 1, where you say, here's your reference architecture. I'm going to change the IP addresses from the back of the book from Dave's company that we used to all read back in the day. And then I'm going to make the company fit into this thing that I've already built. And then the company says, hey, that's great. You've given me a bunch of round holes, but I have square pegs. And we say, well, the vendor gave us a free whittling knife, so we're good. And we can force it in there. So instead, we take the controls we need for the protect surface. So that's step 3. Step 4 is creating policy. And step 5 is what we're really talking about today: monitor and maintain. Take all of that data. I used to call it the digital exhaust, right? Take your digital exhaust, bring it into a system where you can do as much, we call it machine learning now, or artificial intelligence. One friend of mine calls it statistics plus if statements, which I love as a great distinction of what artificial intelligence is, a bunch of if statements. But monitor and maintain so we can re-inject it back into the system to create an anti-fragile system. So if you're familiar with the concept of anti-fragility from Taleb, Zero Trust makes that particular protect surface anti-fragile, because what we do is we take all of that telemetry and we use it to make everything else better over time. That load that's being generated as we're being attacked, as we mitigate those attacks, we're learning things from it. And that's what my company does for a living now, the one I'm at now. We're constantly re-injecting that back in as a managed service. And so you have to have this understanding of what's happening across this entire environment, across this protect surface. But you will not solve this problem if you think of it as enterprise-wide. Either I have Zero Trust or I don't. You have to take the problem of cybersecurity, break it into bite-sized chunks called the protect surface, and do it one at a time, right? Because you eat elephants and whales one bite at a time. Even though I've never eaten either, I'm told that that's how you eat them.
Yeah, and I think if I can for a second, going back on the point about the different protect services and kind of keying into what saying, fundamentally, like that digital exhaust, that information, that telemetry, having that, and you have to collect it because of those security controls, right? You are under some mandate saying you must collect this information. You must do something with it. You have to store it for this amount of, like we're talking about OMB M2131 earlier. But that enables really advanced analytics. And that's what I'm so personally excited about from a Zero Trust perspective, right? Where it's no longer just, hey, we have the data and it's sitting in a corner somewhere, but we're able to say and look at that protect services you, John, and say, hey, like, what does that look like? And so at Splunk, we're talking about risk-based alerting. And so we're able to take that deep telemetry and actually tie it to some interesting things. We're able to build those patterns of behavior, and we're able to say, hey, what does this risk look like? So when we're saying, hey, we're talking about this particular widget that we're trying to protect, that DASM, is that what I heard?
DAS element.
DAS element, right?
Element.
DAS element, right? So we've got that, and we're saying we're looking over time. How is that either as a risk object, right? What's happening to it? Like, what's going on? Is that incrementing over time? What's the priority? What's the categorization? So all of that fits together, and we're looking at that from a risk-based model. And that same information that we're gathering from a compliance standpoint, we're able to visualize and do controls and have real-time assessments from a compliance point. We're also able to then bridge the gap over to security operations. And I think that's really where all this like rubber meets the road, because from that tactical level where that war in the trenches is going on, where they're saying, I hate phrase Zero Trust, but if you just stripped off Zero Trust and talked about the things that it's enabling, right? Like they're like, yep, I like that. I like that. I like that. I like this. But you never mention the word Zero Trust. They're a fan. But then you throw Zero Trust and like they kick you out of the conference room. So don't ever mention
the conference room.
Well, when you're like 5 foot,
people.
Yeah, when you're 5'4", I'm pretty easy to toss out of the conference room. Okay. So my point in all of that saying is like you can actually start building those bridges. We can start taking that digital exhaust to the telemetry, and we're able to do stuff with it. I think that's really compelling because it helps the executives, the C levels, and it helps the practitioners, and you're able to actually achieve something. It's exciting.
And you said something that actually is pretty profound. You said that people are doing this getting this telemetry because compliance mandates them to do it, and you listed a whole bunch of numbers that kind of I don't care about anymore. But that was always the thing that was amazing to me, is we needed to have compliance to do that. I remember when I first did my QDSP with Visa, before there was even a PCI QSA program, meeting with the CISO of Visa, and he said, hey, we put the requirement for log management, which became requirement 12 of PCI, in there, not because it provide value to the end user, which became the vendor spin. You talk about vendor spin, right? PCI requires you to have SIM. No, it doesn't. It says you have to have a log manager. But we put it in there not for them, but for us, because we would go into these places and no one had any data about what happened. So that was put in by the card brands to make sure they had data to do investigations. And the fact that no one ever wanted to see that data before they were compelled to do it speaks to some of the problems that we fundamentally have in this industry, where we are too compliance driven and we wait for failures of corporate governance to force our hands to do the things we should have been doing already. And this is something that fundamentally has to change. And this is what leaders understand about zero trust, right? So what trust actually brings is grand strategy to cybersecurity. This is what the DoD has talked to me about a lot, because grand strategy is the ultimate goal that any entity is trying to achieve, and it's defined by grand strategic leaders. So the CEO, the President of the United States, the board of directors, those are grand strategic leaders. The people that you're talking to who say they don't like the idea or the terms or us, they're far down, way below those grand strategic leaders, and they need to understand that their job is to meet the objectives of the business leaders. And this is where the disconnect has happened. I did primary research at Forrester on this topic as part of Zero Trust, and asked business leaders and technology leaders to stack rank their top priorities. So the business leaders' top priorities were increase revenue, increase profitability, and stop data breaches. Those were the top three. Guess what? Those three were the bottom three from technology leaders. At that time, they cared about increasing antivirus catch rate and speed to patching and all of that stuff that is important, but it's just the widgets, right? It's like you're the architect of your house told the plumber how to plumb the house. And we've made the plumbers and the electricians important, and they don't define what the house is going to be. And we let them find what the house is going to be, and now we have a broken house. So we have to get this a new set of perspective and a new set of incentives from the leadership of our organization. So if you're a business leader out there or a technology leader, this is why you need to drive this zero trust message to your teams so that you can achieve those ultimate grand strategic goals for your organization.
You hit on corporate governance, and I couldn't agree more. I've been in corporate my entire life. I spent 20 plus years in Fortune 100 and large government agencies, and I've seen it firsthand. I think we'll have this idea of, if I don't see it, then I have to do anything about it, right? And there is a bit of a propensity. There's kind of a moral hazard there, right? The idea that, well, if I don't have that data and I haven't been told about a problem, then I have to fix it. And I think the SEC is becoming very hip to this idea that we can't allow that to continue to happen. Right? So the data is going to have to be, we're seeing M2131 saying you will collect that data. We saw that with PCI in the industry, 15, 20 years ago. And it was kind of like M2131 for cardholders, right? Or for the card processors. And so we're seeing this emerging trend where you can claim ignorance. You can claim plausible deniability. And of course, CISOs, to me, that's been a courtesy title always, right? Even though, I've spoken to the guy who claims to be the first CISO in the world, and that's fine. But until it is an actual statutory title, and these guys putting their names on the 10Q and 10K, it doesn't really mean anything, right? We have CFOs, we have CEOs, everything else, sort of small potatoes, right? And so until the CISO is signing off on controls personally, and that carries a legal liability, then we can start talking about it. But I think we're moving in that direction. At least the SEC is looking at it for the public companies. We're seeing it in federal space. You can't claim ignorance. You got to have the data. You got to look at the data, and you got to know what it means. And then you're going to have to make decisions, and you're going to have to stand up and answer for those decisions. We saw what happened with SolarWinds. We saw what happened with Colonial Pipeline. Nobody wants to be on TV. Nobody wants to be answering these questions. But ultimately, we're talking.
That's the fundamental one. That's the one that changed everything, right? Yep. Target, OPM, those were the big ones. SolarWinds, and I guess the CEO resigned right before that happened, so clearly they must have known that. But the one that happened at the same time, Mandiant, that doesn't get as much publicity, whoever runs PR for them is great. How did he keep his job? And he's a friend I know the guy, right? But what has to happen is that these executives have to take responsibility for the cyber and the technology stuff, because it's just as important. It's no longer a cost center. right? We used to say that was a cost center, and we have to live with the dang IT people. They're the Department of No, and the cyber people, they're the Department of Heck, double heck no, right? And so we have to live with those people, but they're sure a pain. Well, now every single business doesn't run if the IT stuff doesn't run, right? And if the IT stuff is compromised and it's insecure, it doesn't run either. So your entire livelihood is dependent upon this. And we have to understand this. Do I have time for one quick story that kind of illustrates this, Igor? Because I know
we have time. We have time.
Okay. So I was talking to the CEO, and he told me about the time that his IT and security people all came to his office, all excited because they'd accidentally discovered somebody trying to steal his source code, and they had stopped it. Right? They were wonderful. They had stopped it, and he looked at him and he said, "Hold it. You mean you weren't trying purposefully to protect the source code of the company? You accidentally just did that?" And they said, "Yeah, we don't normally protect the source code. We protect, laptops. That's what we're worried about. Viruses, all that stuff." And he said, "But don't you understand that 100% of the revenue of our company comes from that source code? And if we don't have that source code, you don't have a job." So we talk about risk based. I'd much rather see decisions be revenue based. How are you making money? Right? Because I'm still a capitalist. I don't know about you guys, but I'm still a capitalist, and we all got to make money. And so how is your business making money? That should determine how you're going to do your cybersecurity.
I always chuckled at the idea of business security alignment. And anytime that came up in any meeting that I was ever in, whether as clients or as a captive employee, I always would try to pause the meeting and say
captive employee.
Well, that actually defines a minority of my career. So I have to say that. Okay. But I always try to kind of pause the meeting and say, look, what are we talking about? Alignment. Why are we saying alignment? These things have never been apart in the first place. Stop treating security as a separate silo. Stop treating it as a separate function. It should be a dimension of all your functions. And you should look at it from a perspective of how does your business make money, exactly to your point. How do you make money? And then everything else flows from that. If it doesn't support your revenue model, if it does not support your value chain, then don't do it. All right. And I think it goes back to that strategic filter, knowing what to do, but most importantly, knowing what to do because you have to limit your use of resources. And so we have a question actually from the audience, and I'd love to hear the panel take a crack at it. So how would Zero Trust map NIST 853 at Tier 1 organization and Tier 2 mission and business objectives? I think we talked about a little bit, but maybe you guys want to sound off on that a little bit more. Who wants to go first?